All right, everybody, welcome. It's Friday. Welcome back. It's the Democracy Stupid. I'm Edwin Eisendrath. My guest today is Radley Balko, who is a fabulous award-winning journalist. He's an author. You can find him on social media, and he publishes The Watch on Substack, which is really quite terrific. And for those of you who watch every week, you can tell I am not in my studio, but in one of those charming hotel rooms on the road. So I apologize for what it looks like. Radley, I want to talk about your work, but I think we have to talk about the news first. And you like pick your poison. I mean, the jobs report came out, and that's showing an enormous failure of economic leadership again, as we're now in negative territory. We're shedding jobs. And then there's this thing that no one in Congress will call a war, but the president this morning said, I will have unconditional surrender and I will pick the next leaders of Iran. Is that going to be enough for Congress to call it a war?
I mean, they kind of do call it a war depending on the context and who they're talking to. But yeah, I mean, Trump has referred to it as a war over and over again, except when legally that becomes problematic for him. It's being waged by the Department of War, although Mike Johnson reverted back to calling it the Department of Defense yesterday when, in the context of congressional authorization. So yeah, I mean, they kind of pick and choose the reality that they need based on the circumstances. And, this dual state doctrine, as it's sometimes called, is typical of autocratic governments. You make the legal argument that you need to in court while in public or to your allies in Congress, you state what your real intentions are, right? So we saw this when Trump first sent the National Guard and the Marines into Los Angeles. It was, legally, the argument they made was, well, it's because these protesters are preventing immigration officers from being able to do their jobs and enforcing immigration law. Publicly, Kristi Noem holds a press conference and says, we sent the Marines into LA and they're going to stay there because, the mission is to liberate Los Angeles from its socialist political leadership, right? So yeah, I mean, this is what they do. This is what all kind of aspiring autocrats do. It's just, with increasingly dire and profound consequences. In this case, an actual all-out war with another country.
With apparently many countries now. It's spiraling and out of control in a very volatile region. It's so dangerous. And apparently, no need to bother with a plan as long as I have a media strategy.
Yeah. And I mean, across the board, all the illegal things that they're doing, the drug boat bombings were because of fentanyl. And then when someone, when it was shown to them that there isn't any fentanyl coming through Venezuela, it never has been, it became, partly because of, Venezuela's policy of apparently, sending criminals and people from insane asylums into the U.S. And then it became about stopping cocaine from coming into the U.S. And then it became to stopping cocaine from going through Venezuela to Europe, right? It just, the rationale changes. And basically they want to, they think that they can do whatever they want. And so far, unfortunately, our institutions have not really been able to stop them.
Yeah, before we get off, I'm going to challenge you on that. But look, your work, you've focused for years on policing and on the incredibly complicated set of questions, really, around when and for what purposes society uses force, right? And what's the nature of that force? And you traced the militarization of policing, and you watched that happen and talked about its dangers. And I think, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think the logical outcome of that was what we saw in the streets of Chicago and Minneapolis. And I'd love to get your thoughts on that. And and in that, I mean, America is this amazing idea of individual freedom and agency. If you work hard, you can be something, you can do something. But this militarization, this replacing that idea with, we're going to force you to do certain things, it threatens the very idea of what the fabric of this country is. And now we're seeing the president and Hegseth try and militarize the whole society. And I want to get your sense of that path.
Sure. So I'm going to push back just a little bit. So, my warning, or what I've been trying to argue for 20 years or so, and what people I think who kind of see these issues the same way I do have argued, is that, for the most part, well, let's go back to the founding, right? That's the sign that there's a long answer to come. No, but this country has always had a firewall between the military and domestic policing, right? The idea, this goes back to the British putting soldiers in the streets of Boston and the violence that resulted from that, and the American Revolution. And so there was always this idea that the founders, going back to even sort of the Roman Republic, right? They saw how the domesticization of the military, bringing the military within the country's borders and billeting soldiers in the streets, always had really bad outcomes, right? And there's good reason for this, right? Soldiers' job is to annihilate a foreign enemy. The job of police is to keep the peace and protect our constitutional rights. And so this principle is held more or less for 250 years. Like we just, there have been times when presidents have deployed the military domestically, but it's always been temporary. It's always been in response to a crisis or some type sort of emergency. And I think there are times when it was done. In retrospect, it was a poor decision to do that, but it was always done with kind of the appropriate, solemnity and with great reservation, right?
And
limitations, right? So what I and other people, who see these issues this way have argued over the years is that while we've done a good job of that, where we've kind of dropped the ball is that our police have become increasingly militarized and increasingly like soldiers. And from my perspective, my argument has always been, if you understand that domestic policing is an inappropriate job for the military and for soldiers, it doesn't matter if they're actual soldiers or if they're police officers who we've armed like soldiers, trained like soldiers, dressed like soldiers, and told that they're fighting a war, whether it's a war on crime or drugs or terror. You run into the same problems. You get police who can increasingly sort of see the people they're supposed to be protecting as the enemy, right? So that has been where the debate has been for a very long time. But there are always some shared principles and understandings, even among the people that I've vigorously debated over the years on these issues. And those principles are things like the military shouldn't be used. The actual military shouldn't be used for domestic policing, right? Police should always serve the public. They shouldn't serve a particular party or a particular interest, or especially one particular person, right? One particular man, one particular politician. And so what we've seen since Trump taken office is kind of a shedding of those basic sort of understandings and principles. Trump, has openly advocated deploying the military domestically and for, an indefinite amount of time, right? He has said that he wanted to send the military. He sent them to Los Angeles until the court stopped him. He sent them into Chicago until the court stopped him. They're still in D.C. He wants to send them to other cities around the country. He thinks that, he doesn't appreciate this difference. And he's always been that way, right? There's an infamous interview he gave with Playboy magazine in the late 80s where he praised the Chinese crackdown on Tiananmen Square on the peaceful protesters there as a show of strength, and contrasted that to the U.S., which he said, the U.S. government, couldn't show that kind of strength. And so what we've seen is a shedding of this principle. And so now, because we're this very sort of polarized country in terms of politics, you have, one half of the two parties that share power in this country now arguing that there's nothing wrong with deploying the military for domestic policing, that this is a perfectly fine power for the executive to engage in. You have, the conservative kind of right-wing media ecosystem now advocating this position. And so this consensus, this shared consensus we've had for 250 years, in a matter of months, it was gone. It was now something to be debated. The other principle is that Trump is now sending these forces, these police forces, into these cities to do his bidding, his personal bidding. There's no pretense that what was happening in Chicago and Minneapolis was promoting or protecting public safety. They were creating chaos. The Minneapolis Police Department was overwhelmed because these immigration officers were yanking people out of their cars, arresting them, and then leaving their cars in the middle of the street, right? This was creating safety hazards all over the city. It was making people terrified. People were afraid to go out. They've wrecked economies and neighborhoods in Chicago and Minneapolis with all of this. And it was all because Trump wants this force that he can drop in any city he wants when he's mad at the people who lead that city. Minneapolis is another good example. In court, they argued, well, we had to send these immigration officers because of fraud that was perpetrated by these, Somali people in Minneapolis. Well, first of all, that was already being addressed in the criminal courts. Second, Somali Americans are overwhelmingly American citizens. They came to the country.
Send auditors, if that's your issue. Send auditors.
Right. And then on top of that's not who they were going after, right? They were arresting people who were monitoring ICE officers or protesting, or people who were Latino, or people who were Black, or people who were Hmong. So this was about Trump, and he would admit it later. He said, when he was asked why he was doing this to Minneapolis, why he basically declared war on Minneapolis, he said it was because he won the state 3 times and the local elected officials stole his victory from him. So this is the second kind of shared principle or understanding that has been, basically shed overnight, which is this idea that police exist to serve the public, that law enforcement, their job is to protect all of us and our rights, not to sort of enforce the will and do the bidding of one person or one elected official or one political party. And then the final one is, there's always been an understanding in this country that we don't do secret police in this country. This is what distinguishes us from autocratic countries, but the old Iron Curtain countries. It was almost a cliche, the masked officers who come to your house in the middle of the night and pull you out of your bed, or who yank you out of your car, who can never be identified. Well, that's standard now. And now you have, again, half of the 2 parties that share power in this country are now regularly going on the cable news channels, and openly arguing that we should have masked, anonymous, secret police who should be able to do what they want without any accountability.
Yes, I'm frightened, Radley, that while they're arguing about the very visible masked armed secret police, the very invisible work of Palantir is actually creating a surveillance society, the likes of which we've never seen.
Absolutely, they have it completely backwards, right? They think that the police should be anonymous while they're exercising these really profound powers, including the power to kill. While those of us, the people who are trying to anonymously protest, don't have that right. They have the ability to expose them. They've gone to protesters' homes because they looked up that, they could identify them to facial recognition, and then they look up their address and they go and harass them at home. It is a completely, upside down, understanding of the proper relationship between the government and the governed. And I think we're in really uncharted, dangerous territory right now.
You've spent a lot of time teaching us that, the fear mongering about crime and other things was meant to create space so they could do this stuff, was meant to manipulate us. So I just want to ask, and I'm asking this because I agree with you and because I've said the same sorts of things, but are we guilty of fear mongering about the end of this democracy in a way that is meant to gin up our base?
No, because I think the fear mongering that we see, that I talk about in my book, my first book about police militarization.
Yep.
The fear mongering was about dehumanizing drug offenders and people who violate the drug laws, because you can't persuade people to start giving up their rights and being willing to see other people's rights stripped from them until you dehumanize the people that they're going after, right? So you
well-known tactic,
right? And so you have to. That's how you prepare a country for war. You have to dehumanize the enemy. And with the drug war, that happened. It took basically 20, 30 years, of regular dehumanization of drug offenders to get to that point. What we've seen Trump do with immigrants, they did virtually overnight, right? I mean, it was during the 2024 campaign, accusing Haitians in Springfield, Ohio of eating people's pets. This Trump's just incredibly racist, mass punishment of Somali Americans, basically calling them garbage who contribute nothing to the country. The dehumanization of African immigrants, of basically everybody except white people from South Africa have been cast as these kind of drains on society, people who, as Trump would have, poisoned the blood of the country. And so they've basically just swapped out immigrants for drug offenders, and overnight created kind of the a willingness in their base to see people punished. I mean, one of the things that really has struck me, I don't use X anymore. I for one, it's just not a pleasant experience, but I do go on there and check it just to see kind of where the other side is right now. And, they aren't cheering because people, because they're deporting the worst of the worst, the hardened criminals. They're not cheering because, because there's less drain on the social safety net or whatever arguments you want to put up against immigration. They're cheering on these websites, on Facebook, on X, on Fox News, on Newsmax. They're cheering because they like to see immigrants suffer, right? They enjoy watching mothers have babies ripped out of their arms. They like seeing ICE officers tackle people on the streets. They enjoy it's the kind of glee that we're seeing from these people watching pain be inflicted on immigrants. And again, that is kind of the recipe for a human rights catastrophe. I mean, when you have people who want people not just shown out of the country, deported, but they want to see pain inflicted on them. Yeah. Again, we're in.
So this is where I said I was going to challenge that earlier. Look, I am familiar with this right-wing hatred, and everywhere they decide they're going to have their own little private chats amongst themselves, time and again they get made public, and they are filled with racist, anti-Semitic.
Just today, another one. Yeah,
another one. Right. This is the Florida one.
Yeah.
Just repulsive stuff. But what I, if I can tear my attention away from that for a second, I note that the public was with Donald Trump on immigration when he showed up, and in less than a year of his horrid, hateful behavior, the public isn't with him anymore. That it may be the Republican Party is indistinguishable from Donald Trump now and all his hateful habits. But the American public isn't there. It's not like it's half of our big political parties, but it is nowhere near half of our people. And every day they're driving people. I don't believe I believe that the values that we hold of freedom and agency and human dignity and equality are still strong enough so that when people see them challenged as starkly, as black and white as they're being challenged in this moment, they pick a side. And the side they are increasingly picking is not Donald Trump's side.
Yeah, I agree with you. So I chose my words carefully when I said, half of the two parties that share.
Yes, you did. You were very careful.
Half the country. But look, I mean, this happened during Trump's first term, right? But by the time he left office in 2020, support for immigration, according to polling, was at an all-time high. So he had, Trump, whatever issue he stakes ground out on and decides that that's going to be the issue he focuses on, public opinion moves the other way. I mean, that's happened over.
Yes, it's certainly been true with tariffs. It's certainly true of this war. And oh my God, just for a moment, the idea that we are sending our young men and women to go fight over there without the support of the American people, because this terrible man didn't even ask America to support them is so unfair to our soldiers, our airmen, and that's just terribly, in every way, it's terrible to everybody.
Yeah. But if you look what happened then, though, then, Trump is out of office for 4 years. And what does he do? Well, he doubles down on the immigration hatred, as does the party in general. It happens to coincide with this surge of migrants, which the Biden administration could have been better prepared for. I completely concede that. But what happens is the Democrats then run away from immigration. They're terrified of this being an issue. And in fact, what they try to do is, they try to pass this border security bill, which was, I think, overly punitive in a lot of ways. But they wanted an election issue that they could say, well, we tried to do something, and you would rather have this issue. And I understand the politics of all of that. But what I think it shows is that if the Democrats had actually led on immigration, that instead of sort of running away from this issue because they're so afraid of what it would mean electorally, instead of they tried to show some leadership and convince people and persuade people about the value of immigrants in this country, how they are valued members of the community. I mean, it's telling to me that the people who pushed back most against the lies about, say, the Haitians in Springfield were residents of Springfield.
Right?
Including Republican leadership in Springfield.
Yeah, it's Americans who are going to save America. It's not the folks in Washington who are going to come late to every game and claim that they were in front of the parade.
I mean, and this is what we've seen over and over again, right? I mean, as the institutions, as the big, law firms, as the big media companies, as they all capitulate, in terror from this administration, what we're seeing is the people of Chicago raising up to defend their neighbors, the people of Minneapolis rising up to defend their neighbors. It is the regular people who are standing up to authority where our institutions have failed.
Yeah. And I think we stood up, no doubt, all of us, to protect each other. But we stood up for another reason too. And that other reason is we don't want to be pushed around.
Yeah.
We are not interested in the government quartering their soldiers in our city, right? And Americans just don't like it. But so on that topic, you wrote this lovely piece, "The Constitution Isn't a Bargaining Chip." That piece right there. And for those of you who are watching it, I'm going to ask for a summary, but I really think you should read it. Would you talk about it?
Sure. Yeah. So this is, again, let me just preface this by saying, I understand the political value in what the Democrats were doing here with the DHS funding showdown, I guess. And what they were saying is, we're asking for these very kind of basic things, and they were trying to get Republicans to have to go on Fox News or wherever and defend the idea of masked secret police, to defend the idea of wholly unaccountable police, even when they gun down, peaceful, unarmed protesters in the street. That said, we are in a very sort of dire situation where basic protections that have always been, enshrined in the Bill of Rights are something that we have to get one side to agree to before we'll fund this, this police agency, this federal police agency. And so, things like you should have to have a warrant before you break into somebody's home and arrest them. You should have a judicially approved warrant. That is, we literally fought the American Revolution over that. I mean, that is, the revolution was fought over soldiers being stationed in the streets of Boston who had general warrants to enter homes anytime they wanted, and the violence and chaos and oppression that resulted from that. I mean, that is why we have a Second, Third, and Fourth Amendment, right? Because of those actions by the British Crown. So the idea that, that would now be something that we're going to negotiate in a debate over a budget, is insane to me. I mean, that is not something we negotiate. We don't negotiate away basic rights. And the same with secret police. I mean, there's nothing in the Constitution that says you can't have secret police or the government doesn't have the power, but it's always been something that's just been accepted that in a free society, you don't have masked armed agents of the government who can, kidnap people at will.
Terrorize children. Yep.
The idea that you don't have to listen to court orders. You don't have to abide by basic habeas corpus. You don't have to afford people basic due process rights. I mean, these should not be negotiable. These should not be a list of demands that one party gives to the other. These should be things that we all agree on and that are accepted. And they are. I mean, they are things that we all agree on and are accepted. The problem is the people in power, who are supported by a very small plurality of the country, have decided that they're just going to ignore them.
So what should Democrats do at this moment? I mean, right, because they said we're not funding DHS. Now, ICE and CPB are funded because of the big, beautiful bill.
Right.
They got that money. But we said, nope, we're not funding the rest of it, period, until there are real changes, until they will agree to police constitutionally in America.
Yeah. There's really not, I'm not an expert on, the procedural rules of the House and Senate. As I understand it, there are things that you can do as the minority party to force votes, to put up roadblocks to slow things down. But I think the piece that I wrote, was not a criticism of Democrats so much as a kind of a big red flag about where we are and how dangerous the situation is. So I do think that getting Republicans on record, taking positions that 80% of the country disagrees with is a sound political strategy. With the midterms coming up, you get that video, you use them in campaign ads. I do think that I think the Democrats need to oppose everything at all times. I mean, they're still confirming Trump's appointees to various positions, so that's got to stop. I mean,
including John Fetterman says he's going to let Trump fill Kristi Noem's now vacant seat.
Yeah, with Mark Wayne Mullen, who is completely unqualified, has said things that should be disqualifying. And
you cannot be in this cabinet if you haven't said things that are not disqualifying.
Right, of course, right. And not to go all break Godwin's law here, but you don't confirm Hitler's transportation secretary because the road he's doing a good job with the roads, right? You oppose everything a totalitarian government is doing, or an aspiring totalitarian government, I guess in this case. You oppose everything they're doing because you don't want to give them any legitimacy at all. And so I think they should do more of that. I think but right now, until they get control of Congress, this is what they can do. And so I think that's fine. Once they have control of Congress, then you start threatening to cut the purse strings, right? Then you make Trump, veto bills. You hold hearings. You hold people accountable. And you expose what's going on with this administration, so people have a full accounting of it. But the real question, I think, this is where I start to get a little squeamish about what do we do? Let's say we get out of this somehow, and in 2028 we have a Democrat in the White House and Democrats control Congress. Well, how do you make sure that this doesn't happen again, right? Well, to some extent, you are going to probably have to exercise the same types of executive powers Trump did that I think are clearly illegal and unconstitutional. But you can't, right? I mean, Trump purged the federal government of anybody he suspected was remotely disloyal, right? And replaced them with his own people. I think that violated a lot of the federal civil protections that we have for the public service. But I also think the next Democrat should do the same thing. I mean, I think we have to get this out.
There are a couple things on that. One, we haven't spoken about this, but you're absolutely right. The Constitution doesn't allow them to, for instance, pretend that they can break into people's houses and take people out without a warrant.
Right.
Can't do it. Can't do it by law. The part of the government that's supposed to protect us from that is the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court has taken a vacation to give Donald Trump the time to consolidate power. They've used their shadow docket. We had Kavanaugh say, you go ahead and racially profile. Take him off the street, right? Just completely unacceptable behavior from the Supreme Court. So when you get to your question of what we have to do next, it includes reforming that court. But Radley, one of the things we've always learned around the world when you overcome a horrible moment like this is we have to make sure the truth gets told, and we have to take their symbols of power and transform them. So I've been completely clear that Mar-a-Lago will become the next Smithsonian Museum of American Fascism. And it's funny, but it's true. Like we did it to Robert E. Lee's house, right?
Yeah.
We said, you don't get that slave camp back. We are going to bury our honored dead there who fought to end your rule.
Yeah.
We have to take that ballroom that he's going to build and either tear it down the moment it's built or use it like the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago, which houses, there's a plane hanging from the ceiling.
Well, I think,
the Qatari plane in there and say, this is what bribery looks like from the White House, right? We need to take their symbols of power and change them. And
I agree. I think we need to tear down most of the ballroom, but I think we should preserve part of it and use it as a site for swearing in of new U.S. citizens. I think
right. Yes, exactly. Or make it the, America was built by immigrants museum. Right. I mean, there are things we have to do to take their symbols of power and transform them on a grand scale. On the legal scale, you bet we have to purge them out of government. And it's not that hard. They didn't swear an oath to the Constitution. They swore an oath to Donald Trump. And we've seen evidence of that left and right. So I think we are completely within our right to take back the government and to use it finally, not just to hold them accountable, which we must do, but to then work for ordinary Americans so that we can have a better life back. And that brings me back to where we started with the horrendous jobs report. I mean, the markets are down, prices are up, job growth has turned negative, unemployment is up, consumer anxiety is up, insurance, people aren't insured. Like Americans are frustrated with their government because they think it's not working for them. And they're right. And it's not working for them because the members of our legislators are working for the map makers and the money, not the people. And once again, you can blame John Roberts for Citizens United and saying the Voting Rights Act is dead. So we have to restore those things, and we have to get rid of the people who would kill them.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Trump's.
Sorry for that rant.
No, that's fine. No, his entire 2024 policy platform when he ran again was foreigners are bad, right? When he was asked about housing policy, it was, once we deport,
get rid of the foreigners, right?
Yeah, there's going to be more. And then what about, price of cost of living? Well, once we get rid of all these people, there'll be fewer people, buying things. There'll be more. I mean, everything came down to foreigners are bad and we're going to get rid of them. And he wants to fund the entire government with tariffs, right? I mean, you know that when you tax something, you get less of it, right? So if you're going to fund the entire government with tariffs, at some point you're going to run out of things to tax and impose tariffs on. I agree with you. I mean, I think there needs to be a major reckoning. I think we need to drastically reform our civil liability laws so that not only ICE officers who committed crimes against these people can be sued in court, which right now it's all but impossible to sue federal law enforcement, but also policymakers. After September 11th, the Supreme Court effectively immunized policymakers, particularly the people who instituted the torture policy, and basically said, as long as if you're making policy, you cannot be sued for people whose constitutional rights are violated by that policy, because we want policymakers to consider all the options. We don't want to limit them in any way.
Right. And the logical outcome of that was presidential immunity, an absurd decision.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, Stephen Miller should be able to be sued by people who were sent to CCOT or people who, were illegally arrested and deported. The idea that the most powerful people in the country should be immune to civil liability for the decisions they make when those decisions rob people of their constitutional rights. I mean, that should be anathematic to everything that we believe in this country.
And it is so much so that it is the core of the Epstein problem, because the core of the Epstein problem really should be those poor young women who were so terribly abused. But I don't think it is. It turns out that the reason why America was fascinated by it was less. We've proven that we do not care a lot about young women who are victims of this. But what Americans apparently do care about is that there is some class of people, the Epstein class, the Davos class, who are immune from normal accountability, who think they rule over the rest of us and don't get held accountable for anything. And Donald Trump has proven what side of that he's on. mean, he brought up these Epstein files, and yet he's also buried them. And it goes to the same thing you're talking about.
I mean, you know, they accuse their opponents of doing all the things that they're doing because, you know, that they know I mean, it's baffling to me that people still haven't caught on to this, that when Trump accuses his opponents of doing something just completely bizarre or out of the blue or something that
he's doing it.
It's because he's doing
it. Yeah. I think people have caught on. You know, I mean, maybe some of our august national media haven't caught on. You know, their bad habits persist, and they can't go where truth will tell them because somehow that doesn't appear balanced. I mean, I love the New York Times. Its headlines have been, you raised their story, their most appalling story, which was the story of his and Kamala Harris's housing policies, where his was deport. And they said, oh, that we have two housing policies. It's utter BS. So they may not figure it out, but the American people are figuring it out. And I'm heartened by election results this week and by polling results, but also by what I saw on the streets in Chicago and what I saw on the streets in Minneapolis. Americans are not going to let our freedom get taken away as easily as these guys think.
Yeah. I mean, I started, you know, really paying attention to what was happening kind of behind the scenes in Chicago. You know, I have friends that, you know, I'm from Indiana, so I have a lot of friends who live in Chicago, and, you know, people who have not been political ever, you know, since I've known them, were furious, and they were organizing, and they were going to, you know, high schools to escort immigrant kids back.
That's absolutely right. Or take people to go eat in neighborhoods that were economically devastated by them. Yep.
They were, you know, getting groceries for people who were afraid to leave their homes. I mean, you know, that to me, and has been kind of, that's what's given me hope and life, you know, in this country, is seeing regular people standing up to all of this.
Yeah. Oh, well, I think that's a great place to end, and I really appreciate it, folks. You should look at the watch seriously. Sign up for it. These issues of how a society polices itself, how we use force, and for what we use, the reasons we use it in our own society, either to enforce law and order or for more nefarious reasons. These are really important topics, and there's really nobody who's written about it like Radley.
Thanks. I appreciate that.
Yep. All right, everybody. See you next week.